Well, there's nothing quite as easy to make as sauerkraut. And homemade sauerkraut is quite delicious. Sauerkraut is so simple. The only ingredients you need is some cabbage and salt. Nothing else is added. And everything is done by weight. I use gram weights when I'm making anything because it's easier to figure the math. So I'm going to take the outside leaves off of this cabbage and take the cores from it. Then I'm going to weigh it to see what my total weight is of the cabbage I've got. And then I'll figure my salt as being 2.5% of the gram weight. Then I'm going to shred this up, add it to a bowl, and then I'll show you how to go from there. Okay, these 2 heads of cabbage, I've taken off the outer peels, and I've taken out the hard core in the middle, and I've got about 1,500 grams of cabbage now that I'm going to cut up for sauerkraut, and to that, my 2.5% of salt will be about 37 grams. One thing, when I'm cutting this up, I'm going to cut it as thin as I possibly can, but some of these heavy veins in, these heavy pieces of leaves in here, they're good to use, but they can be a little tough, so some people like to leave those out. I usually leave those in. Now, when I'm slicing my cabbage, I try to slice it into widths about the same thickness as a coin. But you can see that some of the cabbage still gets a little thick, and that's those thick spots I was showing you about. But if you go about as thick as a quarter or even a dime, that's a good thickness to run. So your sauerkraut is good, because in fresh sauerkraut, your cabbage will remain quite firm and crispy even after it's made into, after it's fermented. And after I've got my cabbage shredded, I usually like to take and come through and cut at least one time through to shorten up some of those strands, so you're not dealing with such long strands, but it doesn't hurt it to even cut it into smaller pieces. And sometimes it makes it easier to eat later on. Now you can also cut your cabbage with like a mandolin slicer rather than a knife, and I just cut it, and you can just do that, and that makes very nice slaw. Sometimes if you got a big head of cabbage, that's hard to do, but that makes it very fine, and that's actually a better consistency for the most part for cabbage for your sauerkraut. Now this is those 2 heads of cabbage shredded up and into this bowl, and I'm going to go through and take out some of these thicker, heavier pieces like this, just because it just does make it a better product for eating, depending on how you're eating your sauerkraut. But you get rid of some of these bigger, thicker pieces, and then on top of that, I've got my salt weighed out, and I'm just going to go ahead and sprinkle the salt in. And that's the only ingredients. And now I'm just going to take a minute and just stir this around, or massage this around just a little bit. And then I'm going to walk away from it pretty soon and let it set for a few minutes, 20 minutes, a half hour, whatever you get time to do. And let the salt start to draw the moisture out of the cabbage. And it'll make a better, it'll make its own juice, because you want to have a lot of liquid when you're making sauerkraut, but it makes its own. You don't have to add any liquid. So like I say, cabbage and salt is all it takes to make sauerkraut. I also like to, while I'm getting this started, to help start the juices flowing, is to macerate the cabbage some. And I actually have a nice kraut pounder you can use like this to start bruising it up and massaging that and getting it. But if you don't have a designated deal like that, I use even just a a rolling pin, or you can just use your fist. Like you don't have to have any special equipment to make this. Just start, and I can already feel that the liquid is starting to release, and this is getting pretty wet, and that's just what I want. And like I say, now I'm going to walk away, and I'll tell you about how long it's been when I come back and show you what progress I'm making. Okay, it's been about an hour, so I'm going to check and see what the cabbage is looking like. Oh yeah, getting lots of nice water in there. You can see a little bit. I'm gonna wait just another. Maybe I'll go ahead and start packing it. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and pack some of this cabbage into a jar. Now you can use any kind of a jar. I've got several jars lined up here. I've got a couple of canning jars. I got a couple of recycled pickle jars. I think that I'm going to reserve my canning jars for something else. So I'll take one of these pickle jars, and I'm just going to start packing the cabbage in there. And the idea is going to be to pack it in good and tight, and get and continue to work the juices. And you'll be surprised at how much cabbage you put in a jar. This cabbage pounder, pickle pounder, has got an end, so it'll even fit the narrow mouth jars too. You just pack that in, and you want that packed tight, tight, tight. And I'll keep doing that, and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. Okay, that entire bowl of cabbage, those 2 heads of cabbage, I've got down into these 2 jars, and you can see that the liquid, and I haven't added any liquid, that's just the liquid coming off the cabbage from the macerating and the salt. Now I'm going to let that go just a little bit longer before I cap it off, because I want to make sure that I get a chance to mash this cabbage way down and get plenty of liquid, because I'm going to try to keep, I'll show you why when I come back. Okay, I've worked on that a little bit longer. You can see all that liquid in there. Both jars got a good amount of liquid. So now I'm going to take some of these cabbage leaves, because now what you want to do is you want to have the cabbage stay submerged under the water, so it doesn't, so it'll ferment without, because the stuff on top could spoil or mold, which won't hurt anything, but you just have to get rid of it. But if you can keep it from floating at all, you're better off. So I'm going to take some cabbage leaves and make a kind of an internal cap to try to keep the cabbage submerged while it ferments. Okay, I've got this kind of on some sealed cap. I mean, yeah, the cabbage cap in there. So it's all, the sauerkraut is all submerged in the water completely. Got it without air in the middle. And so you're doing anaerobic fermentation. Now I'm just going to place these lids on here a little bit loose. And I'll just set this aside at room temperature for at least a week to let it while it ferments. And while you're fermenting the cabbage, it's a good idea to place those in a bowl or something to catch, because as this starts to ferment, now these jars aren't very full, so it probably won't have any spillover, but the lids aren't on tight, but this will start to bubble and ferment, and the cabbage will release more of its liquid, and so you can have some bubble over. Now I'm going to wait and come back and show you in about a week what this is like. Okay. This has been about 24 hours, it's the next day, and I just wanted to show what the condition of this sauerkraut is like. And look at how much liquid has released from that sauerkraut in that jar. and in that jar. And everything is still nice and submerged. It smells really good. So I'll just leave it to ferment. Okay, today is November 10th. I put this sauerkraut to start on November the 7th. And I've showed you how much liquid there was to start with. And there's still a lot of liquid in this one. But the thing I do want to show you is that on this other jar, first of all, I had just a little, no, it was on that first one there. You notice that there's a certain amount of liquid in that bowl because it had been fermenting. Earlier today, this was really bubbling. It was fermenting fast. So it's a good thing to do that. Now I'm just going to leave this probably for, and start making sauerkraut to the sour degree you want is by taste. And so after you taste it down the road in a week or 10 days or 2 weeks, if it gets the degree of sour you want, then you can put it in the fridge and let it, and it won't, that doesn't stop the fermenting, but it slows it down, so you can leave it in there to ferment. Now the next thing I want to show you, point out to you, is that if you'll note, go back and look at the first part of this video, the cabbage was quite a bit greener and it's starting to turn more white. And this is a jar that I'm going to show you now that I put up in January of this year. And so that sauerkraut has been in the fridge, and now it's very delicious. You know, to me it takes 3 or 4 months for it to get, 2 months gets pretty good, 3-4 months is really good. But now I will have this sauerkraut. I'll be using this probably clear up until about March when my next full batch gets ready. I usually make about 20 pounds in the spring. But you can make it in small batches. You can make a half a head. You can make a full head. Basically, 2 pounds fits in one of these quart-sized jars. And so I won't show you anymore. I'm just going to finish up with that and just let you know that sauerkraut is so easy and so good and so fast to make with very little effort. Just getting used to it and then finding out ways to use it. It's great with all kinds of foods. Home fermenting is just a real nice way to extend the life of your foods. Hope you totally enjoy your adventures making sauerkraut.